raised on the Merrimack River here, and I found a passion for the river. I fell in love with the river. I tried to move away several times, and the river always called me back.
It's very picturesque. It's very scenic. I mean, it's beautiful.
The Merrimack River is a magnificent asset to the Newburyport community as well as so many of the communities upriver. It also helps to generate this amazing culture of birds. Audubon Society is on the river. We have an Eagle Festival which takes place along the Merrimack River in February, and eagles have come back, and probably about 10 years ago we started to see, maybe longer, the rebirth of this endangered species, which was wonderful. And I think part of that has to do with being so close to the Merrimack River.
I actually grew up, if a bird was to fly, less than a mile from here. And so, the Merrimack River's always been a part of my childhood, of our upbringing. We used to go to Burbeck's, the ice cream stand that used to be right on the river. We used to eat our ice cream and our banana splits right on the river. So, I mean, if you live in Lowell, and like Lawrence or Haverhill, you live in one of these communities, you're drawn to the river.
The mighty Merrimack River once powered New England's early industrial cities. It was one of the nation's first rivers to be developed into a major source of water power for mills. Lowell is the nation's first planned industrial city. The 117-mile river and its 11 tributaries winds its way through 30 cities and towns, from rural Franklin, New Hampshire, down through the former industrial hubs of Manchester and Nashua, then swinging east into Massachusetts through Lawrence and Haverhill to Newburyport in the Atlantic Ocean. Some 2 million residents live in its watershed. Nearly 600,000 of them depend on the river for drinking water. But for all its beauty, the Merrimack has a pollution problem. The U.S. Forest Service ranked the Merrimack River watershed as among the most threatened in the country. For 15 years, Rocky Morrison has worked to clear the debris that finds its way into the water.
We were an environmental group cleaning up the shoreline of the Merrimack River, which hasn't been done in hundreds of years. So basically, we actually walk shorelines, bagging and tagging all the trash we can find. And basically, when the water's low, we look for stuff, sunken items like tires, TVs, stuff like that are sunk in the mud, cars. Seeing the need of, how bad the river was. Every 15 feet, you would see a bright object floating around, bobbing and weaving in the bushes. And I just took it upon myself with a few friends to start this organization.
Today, the plan is to dive to look for blocks like this, moorings that are on the bottom of the river.
That's what the docks will be tied to, so that they don't float away.
This year, Haverhill has joined the other towns that utilize Rocky services, and they're establishing a facility here.
We have one in Methuen. We're going to have one here, so Rocky's going to keep a boat or two here for the shoreline cleanup.
And check the chains and the shackles on there to make sure they're going to hold the dock when we bring the dock out. So that's why we're here this morning. The current's a little strong, so we're going to attempt it and see how far we can get today. 10 o'clock, 10:07.
The biggest challenge is getting the cities and towns along the river to take part in it. Believe it or not, a lot of them pump their drinking water out of the Merrimack River, but they don't pay any attention to the shoreline, how it needs help. And so basically we need their funding to clean up their shoreline. So right now, that's the biggest thing. So even though there's strong currents, he feels comfortable to zigzag. The zigzag across the whole bottom of the river here, looking for the moorings, the chains, and inspecting them if he can find them.
This side of the river, I could see about 10 feet. We're hoping to find them. They say they're there. They say you could see them at low tide, but I couldn't find them.
When we have the opportunity to put the booms in the water in certain towns that contract with us, we actually put the booms in there to collect the floatables coming down river, which keeps their shorelines clean as we walk behind them and clean up the mess that's behind them on the shoreline. Once these are in place, then we can go with the boats and hand pick the shoreline and clean up that's behind this equipment. As the water slows down, we'll adjust these to go out further a little bit. They all have flashing beacons, so people stay out of it. So at nighttime, they'll see the flashing beacons, so they don't go near them. This one's holding good, so we'll come back out in a day or so and adjust them when the water slows down and tweak it, maybe add another 100 feet to it. Good one to try.
He wants to go the entire length of the river in Massachusetts from Tingsboro to Newburyport. And so he was trying to do is get everybody on board, for a coordinated effort. He quickly realized that that was, a difficult task to obtain, so he sort of went about it then individually. Here we have a robust effort in terms of stormwater, sewage treatment, and just environmental stewardship and conservation of open space that has sort of fit in with Chelmsford's priorities and goals.
Unfortunately, more than trash threatens the river. A number of organizations are working to raise awareness of the problem outdated sewer systems pose to the river.
Merrimack River Watershed Council's been here since 1976. It formed when the Merrimack River was really in its worst pollution stage. Just as some of the new sewage plants were coming online, the idea was to try to clean up the river and make it swimmable and also good for boating and for drinking water too. The river is a lot cleaner than it was 50 years ago, and that's when the Clean Water Act came into effect. So what's happened is there's about 40 sewage treatment plants that have gone in along the river, and they've cleaned up the water significantly. We used to get about 120 million gallons of sewage in the river every day. Right now we're seeing about 800 million over the course of a year, which is actually an increase over the past few years. These old cities we have here, Lawrence, Lowell, Manchester, Nashua, they have these sewage systems that were built in the 1900s and 1800s that used to dump sewage directly into the river. So the sewage plants that we've built take care of most of that sewage, but they can't handle that whole flow that goes in. So the federal government wants these cities to split apart their pipes. So if you have water that's coming into the system through a street drain, they want that split off and they want that to go directly into the river instead of into the sewage treatment plant. And that would help the problem a lot, because that's going to make sure that the sewage and the storm water don't get mixed together and then dumped into the river. So that's a concern for us, because we have a lot of people who are swimming in the river now. You have beaches along the river, Lowell and down towards the seacoast, a lot of people boating, and those folks don't realize that there may have been a rainstorm a couple days before, and there's all sorts of sewage coming down the river that they're not being told is coming down, and they're swimming in it. They're coming in contact with it. And we've seen evidence from medical studies that show that indeed people are getting sick from the Merrimack River and the sewage that comes down.
I started fishing striped bass up here in Newburyport around 1996. In the Merrimack, I'll fish for stripers primarily, but occasionally, and it's been a few years, but I'll actually fish for carp. A lot of people overlook that. That is a tremendous fish, a very challenging fish to catch. I always take it home. I offer it up to friends that like to eat fish, because honestly, it's a big fish and more than I can eat on my own.
The bacteria levels were off the charts. We had to close on the most beautiful Labor Day weekend. We had to close all the beaches and provide warnings to people about the bacteria levels in the river. And I started asking questions. I'm looking at this brown river. I'm like, what is going on? And that's when I first learned about CSOs, combined sewer overflows.
The last sewer overflow was on June 29th, only a couple of weeks ago. The overflow before that was on June 20th, and that lasted 1 hour and 7 minutes. Before that, on June 11th, lasted 40 minutes, and that was 750,000 gallons. And the one before that was on June 6th, and that was 2 hours and 57 minutes, and that was 24 million gallons. And then on June 3rd, it lasted 1 minute, and that was only 20,000 gallons. So in June, the month of June, there were 5 combined sewer overflows.
Certainly people are just revolted by the idea of thinking that you're taking raw sewage and dumping it into the river.
There was only one study that was done, and I've spoken or had contact with the professor at the University of Chicago, Illinois, who did this one study, loosely making connections between 72 hours after a reported CSO and gastrointestinal insult. We need more data like that. We need more economic data. For example, the Ipswich Shellfish Company told me that Newburyport could have a $5 million oyster business if the river wasn't so dirty. We have an off-leash dog park down by the river, and I've seen pictures of dogs with open wounds, and they believe it's from when they went in the river when there was, after a CSO activation. I know that surfers are no longer surfing over off of Plum Island because of the concern about CSOs and the impact on, they're in the water for as many hours surfing. So these are all kinds of factors that are only going to continue to get worse if we don't unite and do something collectively to work with upriver communities. I mean, it's hard being the end user because everything's coming our way.
I think the biggest problems with the Merrimack River are combined sewer overflows. They are the hugest thing that we're dealing with from a public health and environmental perspective. Whenever you have raw sewage going into a waterway where people are recreating and eventually drinking the water, some 600,000 people drinking the water, that to me is a pretty serious public health issue.
Just what is a CSO? A combined sewer system collects rainwater runoff, domestic sewage, and industrial wastewater into one pipe. Under normal conditions, it transports all of the wastewater it collects to a sewage treatment plant. Then after treatment, it's discharged to a water body. When the volume of wastewater exceeds the capacity of the treatment plant, such as during a heavy rain event, untreated stormwater and wastewater discharges directly into the river. CSOs contain not only stormwater, but also untreated human and industrial waste, toxic materials, and debris. That's pretty gross. Why were they even built that way?
This was the standard design that everyone used in the United States from the late 1800s to the 1950s. Because there really was not, unfortunately, an environmental awareness, all of the drainage and wastewater systems were designed to have outfalls into water bodies. In our case, the Merrimack River. So this is not a unique situation for Manchester, New Hampshire, nor New England. Everything on the east coast of the United States, this side of the Mississippi, was built using this standard construction technique, which was one pipe for drainage and wastewater.
Okay, but why is this so hard to fix?
Many engineering problems. The first 90% is easy and cost effective. The last 10% is very difficult and generally not cost effective, and that's where we are now. Most wastewater systems work by gravity, and because of that, they are the deepest pipe in the street. So to go in and do any work on it, you have to remove all the pipes on top of it, which is generally water, generally gas, and usually some type of telecommunication or fiber optics. So it makes it very expensive to go down and dig up these pipes. But all the cities have been doing it, and EPA passed in the mid-90s a CSO policy to eliminate all of the combined sewer overflows. And along the Merrimack River, as you may know, Manchester, Nashua, Lawrence, Lowell, and Haverhill are all CSO cities, we say, and are still discharged to the Merrimack River during heavy rain events. So our systems can generally take low intensity, high duration. What we cannot take, short duration and high intensity, because it overwhelms or exceeds the capacity of the pipe in the ground, and then that triggers a discharge to the river. And I will elaborate on that with climate change that we see now, these rain events are becoming more and more frequent and more intense, which is a great challenge not only for the CSOs, but for all the infrastructure that we have to accommodate stormwater and wastewater. What we are doing is building a new drainage system. So the existing pipe system will only be for wastewater and will have sufficient capacity so there'll be no discharges. But as I mentioned before, it's a very long-term and expensive proposition. It took the city of Manchester $58 million in 10 years to do the west side of our city, and now we're looking to do the east side of our city, and that's about $400 million over 40 years.
Excuse me, how long?
40 years, yes. When you have fire, police, schools, safety, roads, all competing for those tax dollars, it's very difficult to have support for a $200 million program, which we are initiating starting next year.
The biggest thing for me is that these investments, they're not investments that people want to make. right? They don't see the value of the investments. These are pipes in the ground. These are wastewater treatment plants, but when you look at education and you look at the health of a community, right, you need good, clean water. You need water to recreate in. You need water to drink. And that brings economics, it brings tourism, it brings businesses, and it's just the health of the community. So the livability of these communities is tied to the health of the water. And these investments are key to the livability and the health of the water.
When this plant was built, it was built with 75% federal funds, 15% state, and 10% local. That's how this was done. This was a massive public works project, and it was done all over the country. And the EPA folks know the terms better than me, but I think it was called the Construction Grants Program. And this is how the rivers went from, the Cuyahoga River spontaneously combusting to where we are today, where people can enjoy, recreate, and commercial fishing, and, of course, drinking water. All these benefits from clean water. It happened because a commitment was made on the federal level. And since that time, Eric Worrell from DEP mentioned the state revolving fund. It's really great. It's a low interest loan program that the federal government funds. And it really does help, but it's a loan and the communities have to pay it back. And what it ultimately means is if we leave it up to the communities, these poor old mill towns like Lowell and Lawrence, Haverhill, Manchester, then it'll take us decades to eliminate CSOs, literally decades. Here in Lowell, we've been working actively on it for the last 15 years. We spent over $100 million that's been funded by the city of Lowell, okay? So if we really want to expedite this, if we want to make this happen more quickly, we need federal funds.
As it turns out, the Merrimack River and clean water is a priority for federal policymakers, including Congresswoman Lori Trahan. She's gathered stakeholders to discuss the issue, visited water facilities, and is continuing to work with the EPA regional administrator as well as cities and towns to make the river healthy for drinking and recreation.
It's incumbent on us to make those investments in our water infrastructure. And what I learned very quickly from talking to the city manager here in Lowell, to Mark at the water treatment facility, is that municipalities cannot afford these investments alone. They are billions of dollars. And so then you need state partners, you need federal partners to help make sure that we're ensuring the quality of this river, the health of this river for generations to come. We inserted $91 million into the appropriations process to go toward water infrastructure improvements, basically CSO. Secondly, what we did was we started a standalone bill called Stop Sewerage Overflow Act, which gets at CSO specifically. Right now, what a lot of these municipalities rely on is the state revolving water fund, which is a loan program. A lot of municipalities like Lawrence and Haverhill and Lowell and Manchester and New Hampshire, they can't afford these loans. They need grants. We doubled the size of the grant program. It went from $250 million to $500 million. And we also extended the authorization, which just means that we'll be funding it on a much longer time horizon. That's important because what I found in having just regular conversations with new members and older members, Democratic members and Republican members, is that there is a big, huge need out there beyond cities like Lowell. So I'm working with Darren LaHood, who's a Republican from Peoria, Illinois, and a lot of other Republicans who need to make these same exact improvements and upgrades to their water treatment facilities and just don't have the money to do it, need the federal government to kick in.
No matter what you're using your water for, when you turn on the tap, you expect your water to be clean and safe. Some New Hampshire residents found out that was not the case.
I'm the founder of Merrimack Citizens for Clean Water in Merrimack, New Hampshire. We found out in March of 2016 that we've been drinking contaminated water. An industry business called Saint-Gobain Performance Plastics that is very close to the Merrimack River has been using what's called PFAS, a certain class of chemicals, for a number of years, probably from the mid-'80s on, and they've made their way into groundwater, surface water, and drinking water in Merrimack, New Hampshire.
New Hampshire is at the forefront of a growing debate over PFAS chemical contamination in drinking water. The state is suing 8 companies, including DuPont and 3M, over water contamination. The lawsuits mention 700 homes in 4 communities along the Merrimack River that now need to be connected to new water infrastructure because of the contamination.
The state of New Hampshire is now suing the makers of the chemicals, DuPont, 3M, and a bunch of other makers. The smaller makers that we don't recognize the names of are makers of AFFF foam, because fire and firefighting and airport management things have used these foams for years also, same class of chemicals. So the state of New Hampshire's contending that our environment has been contaminated, which it has. In Merrimack alone, we have about a 65 square mile contamination area. The river, the brooks, the groundwater, the soil. So when we look at remediation and cleanup, that's going to be a very expensive, costly process. So the state, we've engaged with the state. We've been making the point for a couple years that these manufacturers knew the harm. They've known the harm for decades. This isn't something they said, oops, we didn't know this hurt people. So we really advocated and they listened. And I think they also came to the conclusion, New Hampshire, we don't have a sales tax, we don't have an income tax, and who's going to pay for this is always an issue. So they're suing to really help with cleanup and remediation of the natural resources more than anything.
Concern about PFAS, often called forever chemicals because they never fully degrade, have mounted in recent years, and regulators are beginning to take action. The chemicals were developed in the 1940s and have since been used as products such as flame retardants, non-stick pans, pizza boxes, clothing, and furniture. Recent studies suggest that the maximum levels allowed in drinking water should be far lower than the current advisory. In July of 2019, New Hampshire adopted the country's most sweeping limits for PFAS chemical contamination in drinking water. It makes New Hampshire the first state to require local water systems, landfills, and wastewater plants to routinely test and treat for 4 chemicals classified as PFAS. Those new standards set off a legal firestorm.
These chemicals with humans, they disrupt your endocrine system, autoimmune. They are associated with certain cancers, cancer like testicular, bladder, liver impacts. Actually, neurological like ADD and autism have been linked with them also. So there's a slew. They seem to, they get into your body and your body can't excrete them as part of the problem. So for kids and babies and in utero, breastfeeding mothers will pass on triple their blood serum to their babies inadvertently, and those babies are small, so the body burden is higher. So when you introduce chemicals that disrupt every function of the body at critical ages of development, you're going to have some issues that may not play out immediately, but over the years they do play out. And there's many, many people in areas with these chemicals, when we talk to each other, that we have similar health profiles: thyroid disorders, thyroid cancers, autoimmune, many, 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 ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, bone and osteoarthritic, high impact to bone, lumbar and hip in particular. Very, very troubling. The other concern is these chemicals travel. They travel quickly in water. They go to other communities. So a identified contamination area doesn't stay so neatly. It doesn't stay, stagnant in that area downriver. We've engaged with folks from Mass because these chemicals are in the river, in the sediment, in the banks of the river, and a lot of people use that for water sources.
As a matter of fact, in July of 2019, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health issued a bottled water consumption advisory, warning that water from Spring Hill Farm Dairy in Haverhill contained PFAS chemicals at levels that DPH recommends not to be consumed by people who are pregnant or breastfeeding or by bottle-fed infants. Spring Hill Farm Dairy subsequently shut down its bottled water operations.
Advocacy is a huge human rights ability of each individual, and I love it when people band together and they get engaged over an issue. So I think advocacy, become engaged, become informed, use your legislators and use your ability as citizens to push public policy where you want it to go.
So here's number 1, you can see the difference. Number 2 is in case it gets by, you can see the rock wall. They did a beautiful job. All this water bottles, all this deplorable stuff will wash right into those rocks and you'll see all this debris. And we actually have 2 guys walking right now. Now that we got these in place, that will keep all this rock wall nice and clean. and it'll keep it safe for anybody coming down here fishing and so forth. So we love our booms. It grabs everything. It grabs trees, it grabs construction debris, it grabs hypodermic needles, it grabs everything. So you can see it does an amazing job on the Merrimack River. The more we put in here, the cleaner the river gets. More of these booms. And that's the future. Hey, Rocky Morrison, I'm still in Lowell, Massachusetts. I want to talk about the hypodermic needles, the homeless camps, and the environmental mess that's out here on the Merrimack River, on the banks of Lowell, Massachusetts. It's a shame. The wind is blowing all this trash right in the Merrimack River. There are hypodermic needles everywhere down here. The state got plenty of money to pass out for these needles and messes like this. Where's the money to clean up environmental nightmares like this? I've asked the city of Lowell to put their little bit in there, just that little bit, but they're saying they have no money. I don't believe it. Do you guys believe it? Look at this nightmare blowing into the Merrimack River from Lowell, Massachusetts. It's a shame, total shame. I believe we're in discussion right now putting booms in the water, as far as the shoreline, as far as the homeless camps. As of right now, they don't need Clean Rivers help, and that's all I can say. Whether they clean them up on their own, I got no idea. We'll see in 6 months or a year. We got no idea. If we can help by finding a grant to go in and clean them up, we'll do that. But as of right now, the town manager says they don't need our help. So we're gonna just focus on the waterways for now.
So that's a pretty big mess that was there.
It is a big mess, and it's just growing. You got to figure every year they'll bring brand new tents, brand new sites. So all the other sites are abandoned with the hypodermic needles and all that. So we can show them the problem. We can try to teach them how to handle it and try to help clean up with it. But we can't financially take on that burden unless the city wants to partner with us.
So you were very mad.
Yeah.
You're very mad. What happened? Like,
I get passionate when I see the edge of the river of mess and the cities are just sitting back doing nothing. And when I bring it to their attention, and a year goes by, another year goes by, and they're still not doing anything, it gets frustrating. Then you find young kids down there fishing through that stuff that's going to get hurt. They're going to get hurt, and a lot of that stuff gets thrown or washed into the river. Either the wind. You're asking me about the wind. It gets blown in. The rain washes stuff in. So it is concerning.
so what prompted you to just call them out like that?
You can knock on the door so many times and be polite, and when the door's shut in your face, or they don't answer your phone calls, or they don't acknowledge the problem, you got to call them out.
It's a frustrating fight, but there is actually strong support for cleaning up the river. In August of 2019, more than a dozen lawmakers and local leaders, calling themselves the Merrimack River Valley Voyagers, spent 4 days kayaking and camping the entire length of the river. Their goal? To raise awareness of the environmental concerns and recreational opportunities of the river, as well as highlight its beauty. Doug Sparks, editor of Merrimack Valley magazine, went along to chronicle the journey.
Really, really ambitious, trying to go 30, 35 miles per day, sometimes against the wind.
Great job, guys!
By getting this group together to kayak from Franklin, New Hampshire, all the way to Plum Island to raise awareness about how beautiful this natural resource really is and how much we need to preserve it for future generations to come.
This is a Senate race right here.
Yes, exactly. No, we're teammates.
It's been a great trip. It's been beautiful. We've seen lots of wildlife, bald eagles, great blue heron, falcons, fish.
There were some unexpected sights as well.
A herd of 100+ cows coming into the river just north of Concord, New Hampshire, and it was amazing.
Going on the banks of the river right here, and all of a sudden, a whole bunch of cows just ran down to the banks like they're waiting for us. That thing you see off in the distance, I don't know if you can see it, that's a whole bunch of cows that apparently saw us coming in the kayaks and ran down to the water. I'm speechless. Anyways, I'm gonna go meet these cows. Hi, cows. Hey, beautiful. Hello, cows. Anyway, here we are, kayaking the Merrimack River, hanging out with a bunch of cows.
The trip was not an easy one. In addition to all that paddling, the crew had to deal with rapids and thunderstorms and portaged the kayaks multiple times. They stopped for several press events before continuing on.
I am really impressed by everyone because I'm telling you, everyone, all of the voyagers right now are extremely sore. Everyone has sore shoulders and blistered fingers and is taking a leave and ibuprofen.
Everything's hurting. Even if you are a kayaker, there's no way to prepare for 4 days of kayaking all day long.
Fingers start to hurt, things that you typically otherwise wouldn't expect to hurt start to hurt.
It was tough for me physically. It was a lot more than I expected. So moments of like, I don't even think I can do this because my shoulder, and it turns out like I had to bow out because my shoulder was so bad. There were moments where I just didn't think I could go on, and it was pretty painful. That was no fun. There were other moments though, like when the skies would open up and it was completely beautiful. There would be 3 or 4 herons flying out from the banks, and we saw what we think were maybe 15 or 20 bald eagles, and you felt like it felt like Jurassic Park. It felt just absolutely kind of beautiful and awe-inspiring.
It's been a challenge in a good way. It's an opportunity, it's a tremendous opportunity to get to see the entire river, but to have a group that's very passionate about the Merrimack, all joining together, encouraging each other, motivating each other, standing with one
and
another.
And that overcomes the pain, right? You don't feel it as much.
Not necessarily standing with one another, paddling with one another to encourage each other to make it down the Merrimack. So definitely sore, but nothing a little encouragement and motivation can't handle from this amazing group. So very, very great opportunity.
We have 2 state reps, 1 Republican, 1 Democrat, and a Democratic senator. It's just amazing to me that in the state of Massachusetts, people on both sides of the aisle do a pretty good job of working together, whatever their differences are.
This is about bipartisanship. We're public representatives first. We're public servants. We're here to provide a public service for the people, not to create divide. My focus is on making sure that we raise awareness and hopefully the ultimate goal is to get the CSOs resolved and so we don't have any more combined sewer overflow events.
This is almost like the lesson for the rest of the country, and people knew this because they were talking about it. They were like, this is amazing that we're all sitting here having a blast. Why can't everyone do this? There's no reason why we can't. Everyone's concerned with the river, right? That's not a partisan issue. The river's not a partisan issue. Everybody wants their drinking water to be clean.
Working together is the only way that we're going to get things done, by working with our federal delegation, working with the New Hampshire delegation, working across the aisle with each other to deliver to the public what they deserve, and that's a clean river.
This is what it takes. It takes everybody coming to the table and working together.
It's definitely one of those things I say all the time. I said people have to get it out of their mind that it's butting heads, because we don't work like that. We work together really well all the time.
We do.
And we even kayak together. Just like as you're coming right here, it's like, you've got to be kidding me. You come all this way and then storm. Just paddled like heck. It kept almost tipping over. Every time a wave would come in, we were like getting rolled.